In today's lesson, we will be looking at pollution and global warming. Well, human activities are shown in the picture. In this first picture here, you can see that the trees are being cut down. We refer to this as deforestation. In this picture here, you can see rice is being grown in fields. This is how land is used and causes or has an effect on biodiversity. How we will look at in the next few slides. So what we're going to look at is some of the biological consequences of global warming. To do this, we need to explain how water, air and land pollution can affect biodiversity. We will also look at eutrophication. So what human activities are affecting biodiversity? Why are humans doing this? And how does it decrease biodiversity? Number one, deforestation. So we're cutting down trees. Why are we doing this? For land use, to make houses, for wood, for timber. How does this decrease biodiversity? Well, if we're cutting down the trees, then we're taking away homes, habitats of the animals and insects that live there. Number two, sewage and water pollution. All sewage goes into the water, polluting it. What lives in the water? Different organisms. How does this decrease biodiversity? The sewage, which is pollution, is going to affect the organisms that live within there. Number three, we have lots and lots of air pollution, and we produce lots of carbon dioxide. This is done through the fossil fuels that we use on a daily basis. And again, if we've got pollution going into the atmosphere, it's going to cause acidic rain, which when it comes down is going to affect organisms on the trees and plants. Number four, landfill. If we are using space for landfills, that space would have had organisms living there. Again, if we're taking that space for landfills, it's going to affect their habitats. Number five, burning peat destroys the habitat and releases CO2. CO2 affecting global warming. And number six, rice fields which release methane. Again, it's taking up the space which was habitat, therefore decreasing biodiversity. Methane, a contributing greenhouse gas which affects global warming. We are now going to look at eutrophication. So what is eutrophication? Eutrophication is when we have a problem with the use of fertilizers and they are washed off the land by rainwater into rivers and lakes. This leaching causes an increase in the levels of minerals such as nitrates and phosphates into the water, and we refer to it as eutrophication. What does this do? It encourages the growth of algae. These form a green bloom over the water, preventing the sunlight from reaching the other water plants. The plants then die because they are unable to carry out photosynthesis. The bacteria then decompose the dead plants, respiring and using up the oxygen in the water as they do this. This then means the low level of oxygen makes it difficult for the aquatic insects and the fish to live, and eventually the lakes and the rivers may be left completely lifeless. This affects biodiversity. How do we know if a river or a lake is polluted? Well, scientists can use the presence or absence of indicator species as evidence to assess the level of pollution. To do this, they look at different organisms. For example, indicator species. If the lake water or the river water is polluted, you'll find lots of bloodworms and sludge worms. If, however, the water is clean, there will be lots of stonefly and freshwater shrimps. Again, we refer to these as indicator species. So that is eutrophication and how we understand or check if the river or lake is polluted or not polluted. We are now going to look at the greenhouse effect and how this causes global warming. So what is the greenhouse effect? The greenhouse effect is caused because of the greenhouse gases that are present in the atmosphere. These include water vapour, carbon dioxide and methane. The gases absorb heat radiated from the earth and then release energy in all directions, which keeps the earth warm. Without these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the earth would be about 18 degrees colder on average than it is now. That would make it way too cold to support life. If we look at the question here, it says, in as much detail as possible, explain why the greenhouse effect is warming up the planet. You must mention wavelength of radiation. To see a diagram like this in an exam is very common. So first of all, why is it that human activities affect global warming and cause the greenhouse effect? So we've already previously looked at different examples from farming cattle, which releases methane, contributing gas to the greenhouse effect, from farming rice, which again releases methane, burning fossil fuels in vehicles and power stations, which releases carbon dioxide, and deforestation, which, if we're cutting down the trees, not just reduces biodiversity, but also it releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and reduces the absorption of the carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. How does this happen? So if we look at the arrows, electromagnetic radiation at most wavelength passes through the Earth's atmosphere. The Earth absorbs most of the radiation and warms it up. The Earth radiates energy as infrared radiation. Some of the infrared radiation goes into space. Some of the infrared radiation is absorbed by the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, therefore causing the lower atmosphere to warm up. What are the consequences of global warming? So, if the Earth gets too hot, we could have a loss of habitats, changes in distribution, changes in migration patterns because it gets too cold or too hot in certain places, and this ultimately affects or reduces biodiversity. An exam question. In the last 200 years, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere has risen. Explain how rising carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere can decrease biodiversity. So this is worth 6 marks. We've looked at a range of factors of how humans are causing more carbon dioxide and methane. This question is talking specifically about carbon dioxide. It's worth 6 marks, so you would need a possible of 6 reasons. Your answers could range from the following. A rise in carbon dioxide increases the atmosphere temperature, which causes global warming. Global warming causes extreme weather patterns. If it causes extreme weather patterns, it can cause animals or organisms to migrate. It can also cause a rise in sea levels. If the Earth is getting too hot, there's going to be ice caps melting, which means the sea levels are going to rise. Increased or decreased rainfall, frequency of storms, and rise in sea levels means habitats will change due to the flooding. Rise in sea levels could increase salt in soil because the flooding will affect the land. Seawater is salty. An increase in rainfall will increase water levels, again causing flooding. Severity of storms or the droughts could affect photosynthesis because the plants are not getting enough water. Consequences of changes are loss or damage to habitats, which will affect animal and plant distributions, which we have already looked at. Ultimately, all affecting biodiversity.